Every parent knows that moment when you do anything to protect your child, even if it means swallowing your pride. Some nights, when you're lying awake wondering how you'll make it through another day, you realize that love makes us capable of the most desperate and beautiful acts of courage. Luke Maddox was facing the worst nightmare any single father could imagine, losing custody of his 7-year-old daughter Emma. With his factory job gone and bills piling up, he walked into Clara Bennett's second-grade classroom and asked her to marry him. Clara, a lonely teacher still healing from her divorce, heard something in his voice that she recognized, the same longing for family that kept her awake at night. What happens when two broken hearts decide to build something real together? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Clara Bennett had always believed that morning sunlight streaming through classroom windows held a special kind of magic. At 34, she'd been teaching second grade at Maplewood Elementary for 8 years, and she still felt her heart lift when she unlocked her classroom door each day. The smell of fresh crayons, the neat rows of tiny desks, the alphabet border dancing around the room, it was her sanctuary. She arranged the day's worksheets with practiced precision, each stack perfectly aligned. Her coffee mug, a cheerful yellow ceramic piece her mother had given her years ago, sat steaming beside a small vase holding fresh daisies she'd picked from her garden that morning. Clara had learned to find joy in these small rituals, these moments of order in a life that sometimes felt too quiet. The first bell rang, and 22 7-year-olds thundered through the door like a joyful stampede. Clara smiled, watching them settle into their morning routine. She knew each child's story, their struggles and triumphs, their favorite subjects and their fears. Teaching wasn't just her profession, it was her calling, the place where her nurturing heart found purpose. "Good morning, scholars," she said warmly, and the children chorused back their greeting. Her eyes naturally found Emma Maddox in the third row, a quiet girl with sandy brown hair, always pulled back in a simple ponytail. Emma was one of those children who seemed older than her years, carrying herself with a careful dignity that tugged at Clara's heart. While the other children chattered and giggled, Emma sat with perfect posture, her hands folded neatly on her desk. She was brilliant, reading at a 4th grade level and solving math problems that challenged some of her classmates. But there was a watchfulness about her that spoke of too much responsibility for such young shoulders. "Emma, would you help me pass out the reading books today?" Clara asked, and the girl's face brightened with genuine pleasure. "Yes, Miss Bennett," Emma replied, rising gracefully from her seat. As they worked together, Clara noticed again how carefully Emma treated each book, how she made sure every student had exactly what they needed before returning to her own desk. The morning progressed with spelling tests and reading circles, but Clara found her attention drifting to Emma more than usual. The child participated eagerly when called upon, but during free time, she often sat alone, drawing elaborate pictures of families, always a mother, father, and child holding hands in front of a house with a garden. During lunch, Clara retreated to her classroom to grade papers, but her mind wandered to the empty velvet ring box hidden in her desk drawer. She'd kept it after her divorce 2 years ago, unable to throw it away but unwilling to look at it. Sometimes she wondered if she was foolish to keep hoping for the family she'd always dreamed of, for children of her own to nurture and love. Her marriage to David had ended when she'd finally accepted that he would never want children. "We're fine as we are," he'd said repeatedly, dismissing her longing as a phase she'd outgrow. When she'd realized she couldn't, she'd found the courage to leave. The divorce had been civilized, even amicable, but it had left her feeling like she'd failed at something fundamental. At 34, Clara was beginning to wonder if her window for motherhood had passed. Her sister Rachel, 3 years younger, already had 2 children and was pregnant with her third. Their mother constantly asked when Clara would settle down and start a family, as if Clara hadn't tried that path already. The afternoon brought math lessons and art projects, and Clara pushed her melancholy aside to focus on her students. Emma approached her desk near the end of the day, clutching a drawing she'd made during art time. "This is for you, Miss Bennet," Emma said quietly. Offering the paper with both hands, Clara accepted it with genuine appreciation. The drawing showed a woman with brown hair standing in front of a classroom, surrounded by smiling children. At the bottom, in Emma's careful second-grade handwriting, were the words, "The best teacher ever." "This is beautiful, Emma." "Thank you so much," Clara said, her voice catching slightly. "I'll treasure this." Emma smiled, one of her rare, unguarded smiles, and returned to her desk to pack up her backpack. Clara watched her go, noting how the child organized her supplies with the same careful precision Clara used in her own life. As the final bell rang and children streamed out to waiting parents and buses, Clara stood in her doorway to supervise dismissal. She watched Emma walk to the pickup area, where a tall man in work clothes waited beside a beat-up blue pickup truck. Luke Maddox was hard to miss. Broad shoulders, weathered hands, and kind eyes that lit up the moment he saw his daughter. Clara had met him briefly during parent-teacher conferences and open house events. He was unfailingly polite, deeply interested in Emma's education, and obviously devoted to his daughter. She'd learned from the school records that Emma's mother had died when she was 4, leaving Luke to raise her alone. The knowledge explained the quiet maturity in Emma's manner, the way she seemed to consider herself responsible for taking care of others. She watched Luke scoop Emma into a hug that lifted her feet off the ground, both of them laughing. The sight sent an unexpected pang through Clara's chest, a longing so sharp it took her breath away. That was what she wanted, that pure, uncomplicated love between parent and child, that sense of belonging to something bigger than herself. After the last student departed, Clara returned to her classroom to finish her daily cleanup. She placed Emma's drawing on her desk where she could see it, smoothing the edges carefully. Outside her windows, the golden afternoon light was fading into evening, and the school building settled into its peaceful quiet. She locked her classroom and walked to the parking lot, where her sensible sedan waited in its assigned spot. The drive home to her small rental house took 15 minutes through familiar neighborhoods lined with old oak trees and well-kept lawns. Her house was charming in its simplicity, a 2-bedroom cottage with a front porch and a back garden she tended with loving care. Inside, everything was neat and organized, from the books arranged by genre on her shelves to the fresh flowers she changed weekly. The spare bedroom served as her office, filled with teaching supplies and student projects she'd saved over the years. Sometimes she stood in the doorway and imagined it as a child's room, painted in soft colors, filled with toys and laughter. Clara made herself dinner and ate alone at her small kitchen table, reading a novel while she finished her meal. It was a pleasant routine, one she'd cultivated to combat the silence that sometimes felt overwhelming. After cleaning up, she settled in her living room with a cup of tea and her lesson plans for the next day. But tonight, concentration eluded her. She kept thinking about Emma's drawing, about Luke's obvious devotion to his daughter, about the way Emma's face had glowed when she'd helped with classroom tasks. Some children were naturally nurturing, and Emma was one of them. She would make a wonderful big sister someday, Clara thought, then caught herself. Why was she thinking such things? She set aside her lesson plans and picked up her phone to call her sister Rachel, who answered on the 3rd ring with the cheerful chaos of dinner time in the background. "Clara, how's my favorite teacher?" Rachel's voice was warm but distracted, and Clara could hear her 2 children squabbling over something in the background. "Fine. Just checking in." "How are you feeling?" Clara asked, referring to Rachel's pregnancy. "Tired but good." "The baby's been active today. I swear this one's going to be a soccer player." Rachel paused, and Clara heard her telling the children to wash their hands. "You sound a little off." "Everything okay?" Clara hesitated. Rachel was wonderfully supportive, but she didn't always understand Clara's struggles with loneliness. "Just tired, I think. Long day with the kids. You should come to dinner Sunday." "The kids miss their aunt and Mark's grilling?" We could set you up with his new co-worker. He's single, great job, loves kids. Rach, we've talked about this, Clara said gently. I'm fine on my own. Are you, though? They worry about you in that house all by yourself. You have so much love to give, Clara. You'd make an amazing mother. The words hit Clara exactly where she was most vulnerable. Maybe it's just not meant to be for me. Don't say that. You're only 34. There's plenty of time. After they hung up, Clara sat in the growing darkness of her living room, not bothering to turn on the lamps. Rachel meant well, but she didn't understand that some dreams felt increasingly fragile with each passing year. Clara had built a good life, meaningful work, a comfortable home, financial independence, but sometimes the silence felt so profound it seemed to echo. She thought again about Emma's drawing, about the pure trust in the child's eyes when she'd handed it over. Emma needed someone to believe in her, to nurture her considerable potential, to help her navigate the complexities of growing up without a mother. And Clara needed— the thought stopped there, too dangerous to complete. Clara Bennett was practical above all else. She didn't indulge in impossible fantasies or waste time wanting things that couldn't be. But as she finally rose to turn on the lights and finish her evening routine, Emma's careful handwriting seemed to glow on the drawing. The best teacher ever. In another part of town, Luke Maddox was helping his daughter with homework at their small kitchen table, unaware that his world was about to change in ways he couldn't imagine. The factory layoff notice sat unopened on the counter. He'd recognized the company letterhead and hadn't found the courage to face the inevitable. Emma worked on her spelling words with the same careful attention she gave everything, occasionally glancing up at him with those solemn brown eyes that reminded him so much of her mother. "Daddy, do you think Miss Bennett is lonely?" Emma asked suddenly, her pencil poised over the word family. The question surprised him. "Why would you ask that, sweetheart?" Emma shrugged, but Luke could see she'd been thinking about this. She always stays after school by herself, and she doesn't have kids at home like the other moms do. Luke felt a familiar tightness in his chest. His daughter was too observant, too aware of the pain that adults carried. "Some people are happy living by themselves, Em. Miss Bennett has all of you kids to take care of at school." "But that's different," Emma insisted, with 7-year-old logic. "At school we have to go home. She doesn't have anybody who stays." The conversation lingered in Luke's mind long after he'd tucked Emma into bed. As he sat at the kitchen table, finally opening the layoff notice with trembling hands, he thought about loneliness and the different forms it could take. His was the loneliness of overwhelming responsibility, of decisions made in isolation, of fears that kept him awake long into the night. But as he read the official confirmation that his job would end in 2 weeks, Luke's thoughts turned to more immediate concerns. How would he tell Emma? How would he make the rent? And most terrifyingly, how would he convince a family court judge that he was still capable of providing a stable home for his daughter? The custody hearing was scheduled for next month, a routine check-in that had suddenly become the most important day of his life. Emma's paternal grandmother had been making noises about taking custody, claiming Luke couldn't provide adequately for the child on his own. Now, without steady employment, her case would look much stronger. Luke looked around their small apartment, clean but shabby, furnished with second-hand pieces and held together by determination more than anything else. It wasn't much, but it was home. Emma had never known anything else, had never wanted for love or attention, even when material things were scarce. He thought about Clara Bennett, about the way Emma's face brightened whenever she talked about her teacher. "Miss Bennett says I'm really good at reading," Emma would report proudly. "Miss Bennett helped me with the hard math. Miss Bennett said my story was the best in the class." Emma had never had a consistent female influence in her life. Luke did his best, but he knew there were things a little girl needed that he couldn't provide. Advice about friendships, help with hair that went beyond a simple ponytail. Someone who understood the complexities of growing up female in a world that could be unkind. As the night grew late and his problems seemed to multiply in the darkness, Luke found himself thinking about something Emma had said weeks ago. "I wish Miss Bennet could be my mom. She would make the best mom ever." At the time, he gently explained that Miss Bennet had her own life, her own family to think about. But now, facing the very real possibility of losing custody of his daughter, Luke began to wonder if there might be a solution that could help them both. It was a crazy idea, desperate and probably foolish, but sometimes desperate times, called for measures that would have seemed impossible under normal circumstances. Clara Bennet was kind, intelligent, devoted to children, and unless Luke was very much mistaken, lonely in her own quiet way. What if there was a way to solve both their problems? The custody letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, delivered by certified mail that Luke had to sign for, with hands that trembled despite his best efforts to stay calm. The official seal of the family court seemed to mock him as he tore open the envelope, already knowing what he would find inside, but hoping against hope that he was wrong. Notice of custody review hearing. The document began in cold official language. The court will review the current custody arrangement for Emma Rose Maddox, age 7, to determine if the existing placement continues to serve the best interests of the child. Luke's legs gave out, and he sank into his kitchen chair, the letter fluttering to the table. The hearing was scheduled for 6 weeks away, November 15th, at 9:30 a.m. 6 weeks to prove that he was still capable of providing a stable home for his daughter when he'd just lost the only steady job he'd ever had. Emma was at school. Thank God. He had 8 hours to figure out how to explain this to her, how to reassure her that everything would be all right when he wasn't sure he believed it himself. The apartment felt smaller suddenly, the worn furniture and patched linoleum floors looking shabbier under the harsh morning light streaming through the windows. He read the letter again, noting the specific requirements the court would be looking for: stable employment, adequate housing, emotional stability, and appropriate support systems for the child's development. Luke had been managing on his own for 3 years since Emma's mother died, but barely managing wasn't going to be enough anymore. The phone rang, startling him from his spiral of panic. The caller ID showed his former mother-in-law's number, and Luke's stomach dropped even further. Margaret Holloway had been making increasingly frequent calls since she'd learned about the custody review. Each conversation a thinly veiled assessment of his fitness as a father. "Luke, dear, I heard about the factory closing." Margaret's voice was honey-sweet with false concern. "I'm so sorry. I know how hard you've been trying. We'll be fine, Margaret. I'm already looking for other work." "Of course you are. But the reality is, sweetheart, that Emma needs stability. She needs a proper home with 2 parents, good schools, opportunities for growth." Margaret paused, letting her words sink in. "Richard and I have been talking, and we think it might be time to consider what's truly best for Emma's future." Luke gripped the phone tighter. "Emma is happy here. She's doing well in school. She has friends. She's a bright child, Luke, too bright to be held back by circumstances beyond her control." Margaret's voice hardened slightly. "I've already spoken with our attorney. The custody hearing will consider all factors, including financial stability and family support." After she hung up, Luke sat in the silence of his empty apartment, feeling the walls closing in around him. Margaret and her husband had resources he could never match: a large house in the suburbs, successful careers, connections throughout the community. They could provide Emma with piano lessons and summer camps, college funds and family vacations. All Luke had to offer was love, and apparently that wasn't going to be enough. The day dragged by in a haze of job applications and mounting panic. When Emma came home from school, chattering excitedly about a story she'd written in class, Luke managed to smile and ask all the right questions while his heart broke a little more with each innocent word. "Ms. Bennet said it was so good she wants to submit it to the district writing contest," Emma announced proudly, pulling a carefully illustrated story from her backpack. "She said I have a real gift for making people care about my characters." Luke examined the story, a tale about a lost kitten who finds a new family, and marveled again at his daughter's talent and sensitivity. Emma had always been special, but under Clara Bennet's encouragement, She was truly blossoming. Miss Bennet is pretty special herself, Luke said carefully, an idea beginning to form in the back of his mind. You really like her, don't you? She's the best teacher ever, Emma said with 7-year-old certainty. She listens to everything I say, and she never makes me feel stupid when I don't understand something. And she smells like flowers and always has band-aids that don't hurt when you pull them off. That night, after Emma was asleep, Luke found himself researching Clara Bennet online. Her school bio mentioned her education degree, her 8 years of teaching experience, her involvement in various educational committees. There was a photo of her receiving a Teacher of the Year award, smiling warmly at the camera with genuine happiness in her eyes. She was 34, unmarried, no children of her own. Luke wondered what her story was, what had led her to pour all her maternal instincts into other people's children. He thought about the way she looked at Emma, not just with professional interest, but with real affection and pride. The crazy idea that had been brewing since the previous week began to solidify into something resembling a plan. It was desperate, probably foolish, and likely to end in embarrassment for both of them. But Luke was a drowning man, and even the slimmest chance of rescue was worth grabbing. Clara Bennet needed a family. Emma needed a mother. And Luke needed a wife if he had any hope of convincing the court that he could provide a stable home. The next morning, Luke called in sick to his supervisor, one of the few remaining benefits of having 2 weeks left at his job, and drove to Emma's school during his lunch break. He waited in the visitors' parking lot, rehearsing what he would say and losing his nerve a dozen times before finally walking into the building. The school secretary directed him to Clara's classroom, warning him that she was on her lunch break. Luke found her grading papers at her desk, a simple sandwich and an apple arranged neatly beside her work. She looked up in surprise when he knocked on the open doorframe. "Mr. Maddox, is everything all right? Is Emma?" "Emma's fine," Luke said quickly, stepping into the classroom and closing the door behind him. "I was hoping we could talk. About Emma, I mean. And about a lot of things." Clara gestured to the student desk beside her own. "Of course. Please, sit down. Emma's been doing wonderfully this year. Her reading comprehension scores are—" "Ms. Bennet," Luke interrupted gently, then stopped, realizing he didn't know how to begin. "How did you ask a virtual stranger to marry you? How did you explain that your daughter's future depended on her answer?" Clara waited patiently, her brown eyes kind and concerned. She was even prettier up close than he'd realized, not in a flashy way, but with the quiet beauty of someone who was genuinely good. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple style, and she wore a blue sweater that brought out the color of her eyes. "I need to ask you something," Luke said finally. "It's going to sound crazy, and I want you to know that I wouldn't be here if I had any other choice." Clara's expression grew more concerned. "What is it, Mr. Maddox?" "Luke, please call me Luke." He took a deep breath and dove in. "I'm about to lose custody of Emma." The words hung in the air between them. Clara's hand went to her throat, her eyes widening with shock and sympathy. "Oh my God, why? You're such a devoted father. I lost my job. The factory's closing, and I can't find anything else that pays enough to keep us in our apartment. Emma's grandmother is pushing for custody, claiming I can't provide a stable environment." Luke's voice cracked slightly. "The hearing is in 6 weeks." Clara leaned forward, her teacher's instincts kicking in. "Surely there are resources available. Job placement services, temporary assistance. I've tried everything. But the truth is, Margaret Holloway has a point. She can give Emma things I never could. A big house, good schools, 2-parent stability." Luke met Clara's eyes directly. "But Emma doesn't want to live with her grandmother. She wants to stay with me, and she wants—" He stopped, realizing he was about to cross a line from which there would be no return. "She wants what?" Clara prompted gently. "She wants a mother," Luke said quietly. "She talks about you all the time, Miss Bennet, about how kind you are, how you make her feel special and smart and important. She drew a picture last week of our family, and when I asked her about it, she said she was pretending you were her mom." Clara's eyes filled with tears. "Oh, Emma, she's such a sweet child. You don't have children of your own, Luke continued, his heart hammering against his ribs. And Emma doesn't have a mother. I know this is going to sound insane, but I keep thinking there might be a way we could help each other. Clara stared at him, clearly not understanding where this was leading. Luke took another deep breath. I need a wife and you need a child. Marry me. The words dropped into the silence like stones into still water. Clara's mouth opened, then closed, then opened again without any sound coming out. She blinked rapidly as if trying to clear her vision. I'm sorry, what did you just say? Marry me, Luke repeated, his voice steadier now that the impossible words were out. Not for love or romance or any of the usual reasons, but Emma adores you, and you clearly care about her. If we were married, I'd have stable housing, two-parent family structure, and a wife with a steady job and community standing. You'd have the child you've always wanted. Clara stood up abruptly, walking to the windows that overlooked the playground. Luke could see her hands shaking as she pressed them against the glass. This is crazy, she whispered. I know it is. But crazy doesn't mean it wouldn't work. She turned to face him, her eyes bright with unshed tears. You don't even know me. We've spoken maybe a dozen times in 3 years. I know you're kind. I know you're patient and intelligent and that you love teaching. I know Emma lights up every time she talks about you. Luke stood as well, careful not to move too close. And I know you're lonely. The last words hit their mark. Clara's face crumpled slightly before she regained control. Even if I wanted to consider such a thing, which I'm not saying I do, it wouldn't work. Marriage requires more than just mutual benefit. There's compatibility, shared values, physical attraction. We're both decent people who care about Emma's well-being, Luke interrupted. That's more than a lot of marriages have. As for the rest, we'd figure it out as we go. Clara sank back into her chair, burying her face in her hands. This is insane. People don't just get married for convenience anymore, don't they? How many couples do you know who married for love and ended up divorced anyway? At least we'd be going in with realistic expectations. She looked up at him through her fingers. What exactly are you proposing? Some kind of business arrangement? A partnership, Luke corrected. We'd live together, raise Emma together, present ourselves as a married couple to the outside world. Everything else, we'd work out the details as we go. And if it doesn't work, if we can't stand each other after 6 months, then we get divorced, and at least Emma will have had a stable home during the custody transition. Luke's voice grew urgent. But Miss Bennet, Clara, I don't think it would come to that. I've watched you with Emma, and I've seen how much joy she brings you. This could be good for both of us. The bell rang, signaling the end of lunch period. Clara looked toward the door, as if expecting her students to burst in at any moment, then back at Luke with an expression of complete bewilderment. I need time to think, she said finally. The hearing is November 15th. If we're going to do this, we'd need to be married by then. Clara stared at him. That's less than 6 weeks away. I know. Luke moved toward the door, then turned back. Clara, I know this sounds desperate because it is, but I'm not asking you to sacrifice your happiness for mine. I think this could work for all of us, you, me, and Emma. Just think about it, please. After he left, Clara sat alone in her classroom, staring at Emma's latest drawing propped up on her desk. In it, 3 stick figures stood in front of a house with a garden. A man, a woman, and a little girl, holding both their hands. For the first time in years, Clara Bennet found herself seriously considering the possibility that dreams might come true in the most unexpected ways. Clara couldn't concentrate on anything for the rest of the day. During reading time, she found herself staring at Emma's bent head as the girl worked diligently on her comprehension worksheets, wondering if Luke's impossible proposal could possibly work. During math lessons, she caught herself mentally calculating how much space Emma's belongings would take up in her spare bedroom. When the final bell rang, she watched Luke pick up his daughter with a mixture of curiosity and something that might have been longing. That evening, Clara pulled her mother's recipe book from the kitchen cabinet where it had sat unused for months. Margaret Bennet had been gone for 2 years now, but her handwritten notes still filled the margins of every page. Emma's favorite, Add extra vanilla. Perfect for Sunday dinners. Clara had inherited not just the recipes, but the dreams that went with them. Family gatherings, holiday traditions, the simple joy of cooking for people you loved. She opened to a page titled Chocolate Chip Pancakes and found herself imagining Saturday mornings with Emma helping to measure ingredients, flour dusting their aprons as they laughed over the griddle. The image was so vivid it took her breath away. Her phone rang, interrupting the dangerous direction of her thoughts. Rachel's name appeared on the screen, and Clara answered with a guilty start, as if her sister could somehow sense what she'd been thinking. "How was your day?" Rachel asked cheerfully, the sounds of her own children playing in the background. "Complicated," Clara admitted, then immediately wished she hadn't. Rachel had an uncanny ability to sense when something was bothering her. Complicated how? Did that new principal give you grief about the reading program again? Clara hesitated. She couldn't possibly explain Luke's proposal. Rachel would either think she'd lost her mind or insist on interfering. "Just one of those days. How are you feeling?" "Like a whale, but a happy whale. Mark felt the baby kick today. He nearly jumped out of his skin." Rachel laughed, then grew more serious. "Clara, are you sure you're okay?" "You sound strange." "I'm fine. Just tired." After hanging up, Clara found herself researching Luke Maddox online, just as he had researched her. There wasn't much to find. A brief mention in the local newspaper when Emma's mother died. A few social media photos showing him at Emma's school events, always standing slightly apart from the other parents, but watching his daughter with obvious pride. She discovered that Sarah Maddox had died in a car accident when Emma was 4, leaving Luke to navigate single parenthood while grieving his wife. The local obituary described Sarah as a beloved nurse and devoted mother. Clara stared at the wedding photo accompanying the article. Luke looked impossibly young, his face radiant with happiness as he gazed at his bride. The man who had proposed to her that afternoon bore little resemblance to the carefree groom in the picture. Life had carved lines around Luke's eyes, taught him to carry worry in the set of his shoulders. But when he looked at Emma, Clara had seen glimpses of that same profound love. Over the next few days, Clara found herself paying closer attention to Emma at school. The girl was unfailingly polite, helpful without being asked, and genuinely kind to her classmates. She had her father's quiet strength and an innate wisdom that sometimes seemed startling in someone so young. "Ms. Bennett," Emma approached her desk after class on Thursday. "Could I help you clean the boards today?" "Of course, sweetheart. You don't have to ask. You're always welcome to help." As they worked together, Clara found herself studying Emma's profile, noting the way the girl's hair caught the afternoon light, the careful concentration with which she approached every task. "Emma, what do you want to be when you grow up?" Clara asked. "A teacher like you," Emma replied without hesitation. "I want to help kids learn to read and make them feel smart and special." Clara's heart clenched. "That's a wonderful goal. You'd make an excellent teacher. Do you think I could teach in your classroom someday?" "When I'm grown up, I would be honored to have you as a colleague," Clara said, meaning every word. Emma beamed, then grew thoughtful. "Miss Bennett, do you ever wish you had kids of your own?" The question hit Clara like a physical blow. She set down her eraser and turned to face Emma fully. "Why do you ask?" "Because you're so good with all of us, and you seem like you'd be the best mom ever. My daddy says some people are just meant to be parents, and I think you're one of those people." Clara knelt down so she was at Emma's eye level. "You know what, Emma? I think you might be right." That evening, Clara made a decision she'd been avoiding all week. She drove to the address she'd found in Emma's school records, a modest apartment complex on the edge of town. Luke answered the door in jeans and a flannel shirt, his hair slightly damp as if he'd just showered. "Clara," he said, surprise evident in his voice. "I wasn't expecting. Could we talk? Somewhere private?" Luke glanced behind him, then stepped onto the small porch, closing the door gently. "Emma's working on homework. We can sit here if that's okay." They settled on the steps, the evening air crisp with the promise of winter. Clara could see into the apartment through the window, a small but tidy space with Emma visible at the kitchen table, pencil in hand as she worked diligently on her assignments. I've been thinking about your proposal, Clara said without preamble. Luke went very still beside her. And? It's crazy. Absolutely insane. She turned to look at him directly. But maybe that doesn't mean it's wrong. Hope flickered in Luke's eyes, quickly tempered by caution. What are you saying? I'm saying I have conditions. A lot of them. Luke nodded eagerly. Whatever you need. First, this would be a partnership in every sense. We share household responsibilities, financial obligations, parenting decisions. I won't be your live-in babysitter. Agreed? Second, we're honest with each other about everything. Finances, concerns about Emma, problems in our arrangement. No secrets. That makes sense. Clara took a deep breath. Third, we give this a real chance. Not forever. I'm not naive enough to think we can promise that. But for at least 2 years. Emma needs stability, not adults who are constantly threatening to change her world again. 2 years, Luke repeated, as if testing how the words sounded. And fourth, Clara's voice grew softer, we put Emma first in everything. Whatever happens between us, we never let it hurt her. Luke was quiet for a long moment, watching his daughter through the window. There's something I need to tell you, he said finally. About finances, Clara waited. I have about $3,000 in savings. The rent here is $800 a month, and I'll get unemployment for a few months, but after that, he shrugged helplessly. I can't contribute much financially, at least not at first. I make enough to support us comfortably, Clara said. And my house is paid off. My parents left it to me. Money isn't the issue here. Then what is? Clara looked at him directly. The issue is whether two essentially strangers can build something real enough to convince a family court judge and strong enough to give Emma the stability she deserves. I think we can, Luke said quietly. Do you? Clara thought about Emma's drawing, about the empty ring box in her desk drawer, about the recipe book filled with dreams of family dinners and holiday traditions. She thought about the loneliness that woke her up at 3 a.m. and the way her heart lifted every time Emma smiled. I think we have to try, she said. Luke exhaled slowly, relief evident in every line of his body. So you'll do it? You'll marry me? I'll marry you, Clara confirmed, the words feeling both terrifying and strangely right. But Luke, we need to be clear about what this is. We're entering into a business partnership that happens to involve marriage. I don't want either of us to get confused about that. Understood. And we tell Emma the truth, that we're doing this to give her a stable home, not because we're in love. Luke winced slightly. She's 7. That might be hard for her to understand. We'll explain it in terms she can grasp. That sometimes adults make practical decisions for the good of their family. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the magnitude of what they'd just agreed to settling around them. When? Luke asked. As soon as possible. We'll need time to get used to living together before the custody hearing. There's something else, Luke said hesitantly. Emma's going to be over the moon about this. She's wanted you to be her mum since practically the first day of school. Clara felt a flutter of panic, mixed with anticipation.
How do we tell her?
Together, Luke said firmly. Tonight, if you're ready. Clara nodded, then surprised herself by reaching over and taking his hand. It was calloused from years of factory work, warm and solid and completely foreign to her. We're really doing this. We're really doing this. Luke agreed. They went inside together to tell Emma that her most impossible wish was about to come true. Emma's reaction to their news exceeded even Luke's expectations. When they sat her down at the kitchen table and carefully explained that Clara would be joining their family, the 7-year-old's face went through a series of expressions. Confusion, hope, disbelief, and finally pure joy. You mean Miss Bennet is going to be my real mom? Emma asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Well, she'll be your stepmother, Luke clarified gently. And we're doing this because we all care about each other and want to be a family. Emma launched herself into Clara's arms with such force that she nearly knocked the chair over. I knew it. I knew you were supposed to be my mom. Clara held the girl close, breathing in the scent of her strawberry shampoo and feeling something deep inside her chest unlock for the first time in years. I would be honored to be your mom, Emma. Over the next 2 weeks, they worked out the practical details with the efficiency of people who understood the stakes. Clara put her house up for sale and started looking for a larger rental that could accommodate all three of them. Luke gave notice at his apartment and began the process of transferring Emma's school records, though she would finish the year in Clara's class. The wedding itself was a purely pragmatic affair. They met at the courthouse on a grey October morning, Emma dressed in her best Sunday dress and clutching a bouquet of daisies Clara had picked from her garden. Luke wore his only suit, slightly too small but clean and pressed, and Clara chose a simple blue dress that brought out her eyes. Luke had struggled with what to do about his wedding ring from Sarah the night before the ceremony. He'd sat at his kitchen table, turning the gold band over in his fingers, remembering the day Sarah had placed it there with trembling hands and promises of forever. In the end, he'd moved it to his right hand, explaining to Clara that while he was committed to their partnership, his first marriage would always be part of who he was. "I wouldn't expect anything else," Clara had said, and Luke had felt a surge of gratitude for her understanding. The ceremony took 10 minutes. Judge Patricia Williams, a kind woman in her 60s, kept the proceedings simple and dignified. When she pronounced them husband and wife, Luke and Clara exchanged a brief, awkward kiss that tasted of coffee and nervousness. Emma clapped enthusiastically from her seat in the front row, beaming as if she'd personally orchestrated the greatest romantic triumph in history. Afterward, they went to lunch at Emma's favorite restaurant, a family diner with worn vinyl booths and waitresses who called everyone honey. Emma chatted non-stop about how exciting it was to have a complete family, while Luke and Clara smiled and nodded and tried to process what they'd just done. "So now you're Emma Maddox Bennett?" the waitress asked Clara when she came to refill their coffee cups. "Actually, I kept my name," Clara replied. "But yes, we're all family now." Moving in together proved more challenging than any of them had anticipated. Clara's house, which had seemed perfectly sized for one person, felt cramped with 3 people's belongings crowded into it. Luke insisted on taking the small office as his bedroom, leaving the master bedroom for Clara and converting Emma's new room from Clara's former guest space. The first week was an exercise in awkward politeness. They tiptoed around each other, careful not to invade personal space or upset established routines. Clara had lived alone for 2 years and had developed precise habits: coffee at exactly 6:30 a.m., news on low volume while she dressed, 20 minutes of reading before bed. Luke was accustomed to the controlled chaos of single parenthood: Emma's backpack by the door, breakfast dishes left in the sink until evening, bedtime stories that could stretch on for an hour if he wasn't firm about limits. "I'm sorry about the mess," Luke said on Wednesday evening, gathering up Emma's art supplies from the kitchen table where she'd been working on a project. "We're not used to having to keep things so tidy." "It's fine," Clara replied, though she'd already reorganized the supply drawer twice that week. "We just need to find our rhythm." Emma, blissfully unaware of the adults' adjustment struggles, threw herself into the new arrangement with wholehearted enthusiasm. She helped Clara plant winter flowers in the front garden, carefully following instructions about spacing and watering. She showed Luke how to make the sandwich cookies that were her favorite after-school snack, giggling when he got the measurements wrong. Most evenings found the 3 of them in the living room after dinner, Emma on the floor working on homework, Luke reading job listings on his laptop, Clara grading papers or planning lessons. It was domestic and peaceful and utterly foreign to both adults, who hadn't shared living space with another person in years. "This is nice," Emma announced one evening, looking up from her math worksheet. "It feels like a real family." Luke and Clara exchanged glances over her head, both thinking the same thing. It did feel like a real family, which was either the best possible outcome or the most dangerous. The sleeping arrangements took some getting used to. Clara's house had thin walls, and she found herself hyper-aware of Luke's presence just down the hall. She could hear him moving around in the morning, getting ready for his job interviews. She could hear him reading to Emma at bedtime, his deep voice gentle as he helped her practice her spelling words. One night, She woke to the sound of quiet crying and found Emma standing in her doorway, tears streaming down her face. "I had a bad dream," Emma whispered, "about my mom in heaven. I dreamed she was mad at me for wanting a new mom." Clara's heart broke. She opened her arms, and Emma climbed into bed beside her, curling up like a small animal seeking warmth. "Your mommy isn't mad at you, sweetheart," Clara murmured, stroking Emma's hair. "She loved you more than anything in the world, and she would want you to be happy and loved." "Do you think she likes you?" Emma asked seriously. Clara thought about Sarah Maddox, about the young woman in the wedding photo who had loved Luke and Emma with her whole heart. "I think she would be grateful that someone loves you as much as I do." Emma fell asleep, curled against Clara's side, and Clara lay awake for hours, staring at the ceiling and marveling at how completely her life had changed in the space of 3 weeks. Luke found them there in the morning, Emma still sleeping peacefully beside Clara, both of them bathed in golden morning light. He stood in the doorway for a long moment, taking in the picture they made, his daughter safe and loved. Clara's face soft with maternal tenderness even in sleep. When Clara woke and saw him watching, she expected awkwardness or embarrassment. Instead, she found something like gratitude in his expression. "She had a nightmare," Clara explained quietly, careful not to wake Emma. "Thank you," Luke said simply, "for being what she needed." As October turned to November and the custody hearing drew closer, they settled into routines that began to feel natural. Clara packed Emma's lunch each morning, including little notes of encouragement for upcoming tests. Luke cooked dinner most evenings, discovering that Clara had simple tastes, and Emma would eat vegetables if they were hidden in pasta. Sauce. They attended parent-teacher conferences together, surreal experience of Clara essentially evaluating her own performance as Emma's teacher, while Luke beamed with pride at his daughter's achievements. They grocery shopped as a family, Emma riding in the cart despite being too old for it, arguing good-naturedly about cereal choices and whether ice cream counted as a necessary food group. To the outside world, they looked like any other small family, adjusting to life together. Clara's colleagues commented on how happy she seemed, how much more relaxed. The neighbors waved when they saw Luke working in the garden or Emma playing in the front yard. But late at night, when Emma was asleep and the house was quiet, Luke and Clara often found themselves sitting at the kitchen table with coffee, talking in low voices about practical matters, Emma's upcoming parent conferences, Luke's job prospects, the logistics of presenting a united front at the custody hearing. "I got a call back for that construction job," Luke reported one evening. "The pay isn't great, but it's steady work." "That's wonderful," Clara said, and meant it. She'd seen how the job search had worn on Luke's confidence, how much he needed to feel like he was contributing. "I want you to know," Luke said carefully, "that I don't take any of this for granted. What you've done for Emma, for me, I know it's not easy." Clara looked at him across the small table, noting the lines of exhaustion around his eyes, the way he carried the weight of responsibility in his shoulders. "It's easier than I expected," she admitted. "Emma makes it easy. And me?" Luke asked quietly. "Do I make it easy?" Clara considered the question seriously. Living with Luke was like sharing space with a considerate roommate who happened to be raising the child she'd come to love. He was unfailingly polite, helpful without being intrusive, careful to respect her space and routines. "You make it work," she said finally. "We both do." It wasn't a declaration of love or even deep friendship, but it was honest. And for now, honesty felt like enough. 3 weeks into their marriage, Clara made Luke a spare room key. It was a small gesture, but as she handed him the brass key on a simple ring, both of them understood its significance. This was no longer her house with guests, it was their home. "Thank you," Luke said, closing his fingers around the key. "I'll try not to mess up your system too badly," Clara smiled. "I think my system could use a little messing up." Luke had started work at Henderson Construction the previous Monday, leaving before dawn and returning home dusty and tired, but satisfied. The job paid less than the factory work, But Luke had always been handy with tools, and there was something deeply satisfying about building things that would last. Emma had adjusted to their new routine with the resilience that children possess. She walked to school with Clara in the mornings, chattering about her dreams from the night before and her plans for the day. In the afternoons, she did homework at the kitchen table while Clara prepared dinner. And in the evenings, all three of them settled into a comfortable routine of domestic life. But adjustment wasn't always smooth. Their first real disagreement came on a Thursday evening when Emma brought home a math test with a C+ marked in red ink. "It's not a bad grade," Luke said, examining the paper while Emma fidgeted nearby. "Math has always been tough for her." Clara looked up from the sink where she was washing dishes. "Actually, Emma's quite good at math when she applies herself. I think we should go over the problems she missed and make sure she understands the concepts. She's 7 years old. Clara, she doesn't need extra pressure about grades. I'm not suggesting pressure. I'm suggesting support." Clara turned to face him fully, dish towel still in her hands. "If we don't address the gaps now, she'll struggle more later." Luke's jaw tightened. "I've been handling Emma's education just fine for 3 years. The words hung in the air like a challenge. Emma looked between them with wide eyes, clearly sensing the tension, even if she didn't understand its source. Clara took a deep breath, reminding herself that Luke's defensiveness came from love and protectiveness, not malice. "You're right. You have been handling it just fine. But now we're partners, which means we make these decisions together." "Partners," Luke repeated as if testing the word. "Right." They spent the next hour working with Emma on her multiplication tables, taking turns explaining different approaches until Emma's face brightened with understanding. When she finally grasped the concept that had been confusing her, she beamed at both adults with equal pride. "I get it now. Can we do more problems?" After Emma was in bed, Luke and Clara found themselves back at the kitchen table with their usual evening coffee. "I'm sorry about earlier," Luke said quietly. "I didn't mean to sound defensive. You weren't wrong to be protective of her," Clara replied. "I should have approached it differently. It's just," Luke ran his hands through his hair. "For 3 years, every decision about Emma has been mine. Her bedtime, her meals, her discipline, her education. Now suddenly I have to check with someone else, and I don't always remember," Clara nodded. "And I've been making decisions about 22 7-year-olds for 8 years, but none of them went home with me. This is new for both of us." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the dishwasher humming in the background. "We need ground rules," Clara said finally. "Clear expectations about how we handle parenting decisions, such as emergency medical decisions. Whoever's available handles it, then informs the other. School issues. We discuss together before taking action. Discipline. We present a united front to Emma, even if we disagree privately." Luke considered this. "What about day-to-day stuff? Bedtime, screen time, chores? We figure out what works and stick to it. But Luke, if something isn't working, we need to be able to talk about it without getting defensive." "Deal," Luke said, extending his hand across the table. "Partners." Clara shook it, noting how different his calloused palm felt compared to her soft teacher's hands. "Partners." The next few weeks tested their new partnership in ways neither had anticipated. Clara's sister, Rachel, invited them to Sunday dinner, eager to meet Luke and assess whether her sister had completely lost her mind. Luke's former mother-in-law called twice, asking pointed questions about his sudden marriage and whether he'd given proper thought to Emma's needs. The dinner at Rachel's house was particularly challenging. Rachel's husband, Mark, was friendly enough, but Clara could see her sister studying Luke throughout the meal, clearly trying to figure out what was really going on. "So, Luke, tell me how you and Clara met," Rachel said while passing the mashed potatoes, her voice carefully casual. Luke glanced at Clara, who gave him an encouraging nod. They'd agreed to keep their story simple and truthful without revealing the practical nature of their arrangement. "Emma's in Clara's class," Luke replied. "We got to know each other through school events and discovered we had a lot in common." "How romantic," Rachel said dryly. "A whirlwind courtship." Clara felt heat rise in her cheeks. "Not everyone needs years of dating to know when something feels right, Rach." Later, As they helped with dishes, Rachel cornered Clara in the kitchen. "Okay, what's really going on?" Rachel demanded in a low voice. 6 months ago, you were convinced you'd never meet anyone, and now suddenly you're married to a guy I've never even heard you mention? Sometimes life surprises you, Clara said, focusing intently on drying a serving bowl. "Clara Elizabeth Bennett, I've known you for 34 years. You don't do impulsive. You research restaurants for 2 weeks before trying them. You've never made a major decision without calling me first." Rachel grabbed her sister's arm gently. "Is he pressuring you somehow? Are you in some kind of trouble?" Clara looked at her sister's worried face and felt a pang of guilt. Rachel's concern came from love, but Clara couldn't explain the truth without betraying Luke's trust and Emma's privacy. "I'm not in trouble," she said finally. "And Luke isn't pressuring me. I know this seems sudden, but Rachel, I'm happier than I've been in years. It wasn't entirely a lie." Despite the awkwardness and adjustment challenges, Clara was discovering that she enjoyed having people to care for, routines to maintain for someone other than herself, a sense of purpose that extended beyond her classroom. Rachel studied her face for a long moment. "You do seem different, more settled somehow." "I am settled. And you love him?" Clara hesitated just a moment too long. "I care about him very much, and I love Emma like she's my own daughter." Rachel's expression softened. "She's a sweet kid. And he clearly adores her." "He's a good father," Clara agreed. "A good man." On the drive home, Emma chattered happily about her cousins and the dessert Rachel had made specially for her, while Luke and Clara sat in comfortable silence. It wasn't until they were putting Emma to bed that Luke mentioned Rachel's obvious suspicion. "Your sister thinks there's something we're not telling her," he said, quietly while Emma brushed her teeth. "She's protective," Clara replied. "She'll adjust. And if she doesn't?" "If she keeps pushing." Clara considered this. "Then we stick to our story. What we're doing, it's working, Luke. Emma's thriving, you're stable, I'm happy. That's what matters." Luke nodded, but Clara could see the worry in his expression. They were walking a careful line between truth and fiction, and the longer they maintained it, the more complicated it became. That night, Clara lay in bed listening to the sounds of her house, her home, filled with other people. Luke's quiet movements in the bathroom as he got ready for bed. Emma talking softly to her stuffed animals as she settled down to sleep. The general sense of life and warmth that had been missing for so long. She thought about Rachel's question about love and realized with surprise that she hadn't been able to answer it as definitively as she'd expected. What she felt for Luke was complicated: gratitude, respect, growing affection, and something else she wasn't quite ready to name. Down the hall, Luke was having his own moment of reckoning. The spare room key sat on his nightstand, catching the light from the street lamp outside his window. Such a small thing, but it represented everything that was changing in his carefully controlled life. Living with Clara was easier than he'd expected, but also more challenging in ways he hadn't anticipated. She was kind and patient, wonderful with Emma, and easy to be around. But sometimes he caught himself watching her as she moved through the house, noting the graceful way she folded laundry or the unconscious smile that crossed her face when Emma accomplished something difficult. He was developing feelings that had no place in their practical arrangement, and he wasn't sure what to do about it. The broken coffee mug happened on a Tuesday morning when everything seemed to go wrong at once. Luke had overslept after staying up late working on job applications. Emma couldn't find her favorite sweater, and Clara was rushing to finish grading tests before school. In his hurry to clear the breakfast dishes, Luke knocked Clara's favorite mug, the cheerful yellow one from her mother, off the counter. The crash of ceramic hitting tiles seemed to echo in the sudden silence. Emma froze with her backpack halfway on, and Luke stared at the scattered pieces with genuine horror. "Oh God, Clara, I'm so sorry," he said, immediately crouching to gather the broken fragments. "I'll replace it. Don't touch it." Clara's voice was sharper than either of them had ever heard it. "Just don't touch it." Luke straightened slowly, confusion evident on his face. It was just a coffee mug, after all. But as Clara knelt to carefully collect the pieces, her hands shaking slightly, He realized this was about more than broken ceramic. "Mama gave this to me the Christmas before she died," Clara said quietly, cradling the largest fragment. "She said every teacher needed a mug that made her smile first thing in the morning." Luke felt something heavy settle in his chest. "Clara, I'm so sorry. I didn't know. How could you know?" Clara stood, the pieces clutched in her palm. "It's not your fault. Accidents happen." But her voice was tight with control, and Luke could see that she was fighting back tears. Emma looked between them with worried eyes, clearly sensing that something important had been broken beyond just the mug. "I'll be late for work," Luke said awkwardly. "Emma, get your things." "I can walk her to school," Clara said, not meeting his eyes. "You should go." The rest of the day felt off-kilter. Luke couldn't concentrate at the job site, replaying the morning scene and Clara's carefully controlled expression. Emma was unusually quiet during her after-school time with Clara, as if she could sense the tension lingering between the adults. When Luke came home that evening, Clara was cooking dinner with mechanical precision, her movements efficient but lacking their usual warmth. The broken mug pieces were nowhere to be seen. "I looked online for a replacement," Luke said carefully as he washed his hands at the sink. "I found the same pattern on eBay. It might not be exactly the same, but it won't be the same," Clara interrupted, then softened her tone. "But thank you for trying." Emma picked at her dinner, glancing between them with increasingly worried looks. Finally, she set down her fork with the dramatic flair only a 7-year-old could muster. "Are you getting divorced?" she asked bluntly. Clara and Luke both looked at her in shock. "Sweetheart, no," Luke said quickly. "Why would you think that?" "Because you're both acting like my friend Kayla's parents did before they got divorced. All polite and weird and not talking to each other except about boring stuff." Clara and Luke exchanged glances over Emma's head, both recognizing the truth in her observation. "We're not getting divorced, Emma," Clara said gently. "Adults sometimes have disagreements, but that doesn't mean they stop caring about each other. Do you care about each other?" Emma pressed with uncomfortable directness. The question hung in the air. Luke found himself looking at Clara, really looking at her, and realizing that somewhere in the past month she'd become more than just Emma's teacher or his convenient wife. She'd become the person who made coffee exactly the way he liked it without being asked, who remembered that he preferred the sports page over the front page news, who had learned to leave the hallway light on because Emma was still afraid of complete darkness. "Yes," he said quietly, "I care about Clara very much." Clara's eyes met his across the table, and something shifted in her expression. "I care about your father too, Emma, very much." After Emma was in bed, they found themselves in their usual spots at the kitchen table. But the comfortable routine felt strained. "I overreacted this morning," Clara said finally. "It was just a mug." "It wasn't just a mug," Luke replied. "It was a connection to your mother, and I destroyed it through carelessness." Clara wrapped her hands around her coffee cup, a plain white replacement that looked stark against her fingers. "I keep forgetting that you didn't know me before. You don't know about my patterns, my attachments to things. I've been living alone for so long that everything in this house has a story, a meaning." "Tell me," Luke said simply. So Clara did. She told him about the ceramic bowl her grandmother had made, about the bookends Rachel had given her for her teaching degree, about the throw pillow she'd bought to celebrate getting tenure. She told him about the empty spaces too, the guest bedroom that was meant to be a nursery, the dining room table, size for a family that had never materialized. "I turned this house into a museum of my own disappointments," Clara said with rueful honesty. "And then you and Emma moved in, and suddenly it felt alive again. But I hadn't figured out how to let go of the museum part." Luke listened without judgment, understanding more with each revelation how much courage it had taken for Clara to let them into her carefully controlled world. "I've been doing something similar," he admitted, "holding on to routines and ways of doing things because changing them felt like betraying Sarah's memory or failing Emma somehow." "Are we failing her?" Luke considered the question seriously. "I don't think so, but I think we're both still figuring out how to be a family instead of just 3 people living in the same house. Over the next few days, they made an effort to be more intentional about their interactions. Luke replaced Clara's broken mug with a handmade ceramic piece from a local artist, different from her mother's gift, but beautiful in its own right. Clara taught Luke how she organized Emma's school papers and included him in decisions about Emma's upcoming parent-teacher conferences with her other teachers, but their friends and family continued to present challenges. Clara's colleague Jennifer cornered her in the teacher's lounge with pointed questions about her whirlwind romance. Luke's former mother-in-law Margaret called again, this time demanding to meet Clara before the custody hearing. I think it's reasonable for me to assess the woman who's suddenly so important in my granddaughter's life. Margaret said during the tense phone conversation Luke put on speaker so Clara could hear. Clara isn't suddenly important, Luke replied carefully. She's been Emma's teacher for months. Emma adores her. A teacher is one thing, Luke. A stepmother is quite another. They arranged to meet Margaret at a family restaurant on Saturday afternoon. Clara spent the morning changing clothes 3 times, finally settling on a conservative dress that made her look both professional and maternal. Margaret Holloway was an elegant woman in her early 60s, with silver hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. She greeted Clara with cool politeness and proceeded to interrogate her as if she were applying for a job, which, Clara realized, she essentially was. How long have you been teaching? Margaret asked over coffee and Emma's enthusiastic consumption of a chocolate sundae. 8 years at Maplewood Elementary, Clara replied. I have my master's degree in early childhood education, and you've never had children of your own. The question was delivered with surgical precision, designed to cut. Luke tensed beside Clara, but she answered calmly, No, I haven't, but I've dedicated my career to nurturing and educating children. Emma is very special to me. Margaret turned her attention to Emma, who had been unusually quiet during the adult conversation. How do you like having Clara in your house, sweetheart? Emma straightened with the seriousness of a child who understood the importance of the moment. I love it, Grandma Margaret. Clara reads me stories and helps with my homework and makes pancakes that look like flowers. And she doesn't get scared when I have bad dreams. That's lovely, dear. But don't you think it's all happening rather fast? Emma frowned, clearly not understanding. What's happening fast? Your father getting married so quickly. Don't you think he should have taken more time to make sure it was the right decision? Clara felt Luke go rigid beside her, but Emma's response surprised them all. Daddy always makes good decisions, Emma said with perfect 7-year-old confidence. And Clara makes him smile now. He didn't smile much before, but now he does. Margaret's expression softened slightly at her granddaughter's earnest words, but she wasn't finished with her assessment. Clara, you seem like a lovely young woman, but surely you understand my concerns. Emma has already lost one mother. If this arrangement doesn't work out, it will work out, Clara interrupted quietly but firmly. Because we're committed to making it work, and because Emma deserves nothing less. After Margaret left, with grudging approval but obvious ongoing skepticism, Clara, Luke and Emma walked through the park behind the restaurant. Emma ran ahead to the playground, leaving the adults alone on a bench, watching her navigate the monkey bars with determined concentration. That was brutal, Luke said finally. She loves Emma, I can't fault her for that, even though she basically questioned your motives and our judgment. Clara was quiet for a moment, watching Emma successfully complete the monkey bars and beam with pride at her accomplishment. Luke, can I ask you something? Of course. When you proposed to me, was it just about the custody hearing, or was there more to it? Luke studied Clara's profile, noting the way the autumn sunlight caught the gold highlights in her brown hair, the gentle curve of her mouth as she watched Emma play. At first, it was about the custody hearing, he said honestly. But even then it was more than that. Emma had been talking about you for months, about how kind you were, how much she wished. He paused, choosing his words carefully. I think part of me was already hoping for something I didn't know how to ask for. Clara turned to look at him directly. What were you hoping for? For Emma to have a mother who would love her unconditionally. For myself, he stopped, the admission too dangerous to voice. For yourself, what? Luke looked at Emma, now hanging upside down from the monkey bars and giggling with pure joy, then back at Clara's patient, understanding face. For a chance at a real family again, he said quietly, even if it didn't start the conventional way. The job offer letter arrived on a Monday morning in November, delivered by express mail with the official seal of the International Schools Consortium. Clara signed for it with trembling hands, recognizing the return address immediately. 6 months ago, she had submitted an application on a whim, never expecting to hear back from such a prestigious organization. St. Margaret's International School, London, she read aloud in the empty kitchen. Luke and Emma having already left for work and school respectively. The position was everything she had once dreamed of, head of primary education at a school that served diplomatic families and international business people. The salary was nearly double what she made in their small town, and the benefits package included housing, travel allowances, and opportunities for professional development that would advance her career beyond anything possible locally. Clara sank into a chair at the kitchen table, the letter fluttering from her numb fingers. This was the dream job she had applied for in her previous life, when she was single and childless and free to chase opportunities anywhere in the world. Now staring at the formal letterhead, she felt nothing but confusion and a growing sense of panic. The position would begin in January, just 2 months away. The timing couldn't have been worse, or perhaps it was perfectly timed, depending on how she chose to look at it. When Emma bounded through the door that afternoon, full of stories about her day and excited about the Thanksgiving play rehearsals, Clara found herself studying the child's animated face with new intensity. How could she possibly consider leaving this bright, loving girl who had become the daughter of her heart? But when Luke came home an hour later, dusty from the construction site and tired but content, Clara knew she had to tell him about the offer. They had promised honesty above all else. London, Luke repeated after she'd explained the situation, his face carefully neutral. That's quite an opportunity. It is, Clara agreed, wishing she could read his expression. When would you start? January 15th. They need an answer by the end of this week. Emma, who had been coloring at the kitchen table while half listening to their conversation, suddenly looked up with wide eyes. Clara's going to London? But that's far away. It's just a job offer, sweetheart, Clara said quickly. I haven't decided anything yet. But Emma's face had already crumpled with the beginning of tears. You can't go to London. You just became my mom. Luke scooped Emma onto his lap, meeting Clara's eyes over his daughter's head with an expression she couldn't decipher. Clara hasn't made any decisions yet. Let's not worry about something that might not happen. That night, after Emma was finally asleep following an hour of tearful reassurances, Clara and Luke sat in the living room instead of their usual kitchen table spot. The formal job offer lay between them on the coffee table like an accusation. You should take it, Luke said quietly. Clara stared at him in shock. What? It's everything you wanted before this arrangement. International experience, career advancement, the chance to make a real difference in education. Luke's voice was carefully controlled. You shouldn't give up your dreams because of a practical marriage. But Emma will adjust. Kids are resilient. Clara felt as if she'd been slapped. That's it? Emma will adjust, so I should just leave. Luke ran his hands through his hair. A gesture Clara had learned meant he was struggling with difficult emotions. Clara, when I proposed to you, I asked you to give up your life to solve my problems. That wasn't fair, and I can't ask you to keep making that sacrifice. What if I don't see it as a sacrifice? The question hung in the air between them. Luke looked at her with something that might have been hope, quickly suppressed. Don't you? He asked quietly. Clara opened her mouth to answer, then realized she wasn't sure. Was living in their small town, teaching the same grade year after year, being stepmother to Emma, was that settling for less than she deserved? Or was it finally getting everything she'd actually wanted? I don't know, she admitted. The next few days were strained as all three of them processed the implications of Clara's decision. Emma became clingy and worried, asking repeatedly if Clara was going to leave them. Luke withdrew into careful politeness, treating Clara with the distant courtesy of a roommate rather than a wife. Clara called the school district in London, asking detailed questions about the position, the city, the expectations. She researched neighborhoods and housing options, trying to imagine herself starting over in a new country. The practical part of her mind, that had always governed her major decisions, began making lists of pros and cons. On Thursday evening, while Clara was grading papers and Luke was helping Emma with a science project, the phone rang. Margaret Holloway's name appeared on the caller ID, and Luke answered with obvious reluctance. "I heard about Clara's job opportunity," Margaret said without preamble, her voice carrying clearly through the speakerphone. "I think it's wonderful news." Luke's jaw tightened. "Why is that, Margaret?" "Well, it solves everyone's problems, doesn't it? Clara gets the career opportunity she deserves, and Emma gets to come live with Richard and me, where she belongs. We can provide her with stability and consistency, things that are clearly lacking in this makeshift arrangement." Emma, who had been listening with growing alarm, suddenly burst into tears. "I don't want to live with Grandma, Margaret. I want to stay with you and Clara." Luke ended the call abruptly and gathered his sobbing daughter into his arms. "Shh, baby girl. Nobody's making you live anywhere you don't want to live." But over Emma's head, his eyes met Clara's, and she saw the defeat there. Margaret was right about one thing. If Clara left, Luke would be back to being a single father with limited resources and an ex-mother-in-law determined to prove he was unfit. That night, Clara couldn't sleep. She found herself standing in Emma's doorway, watching the child sleep peacefully, her stuffed animals arranged carefully around her pillow. Emma had adapted to their unconventional family with such trust and joy. How could Clara even consider disrupting that? But down the hall, she could hear Luke moving restlessly in his room, and she knew he was struggling too. He had married her to keep his daughter, and now her leaving would accomplish exactly what they'd been trying to prevent. On Friday morning, Clara made her decision. She called the London school and accepted the position. "Clara, that's wonderful," the headmistress said warmly. "We're so excited to have you join our team. I'll have HR send you the relocation package information right away." After hanging up, Clara sat in her classroom during lunch break, staring at Emma's latest drawing propped on her desk. This one showed the three of them at the Thanksgiving table, all smiling and holding hands. At the bottom, in Emma's careful handwriting, were the words, "My forever family." Clara buried her face in her hands and wept. That afternoon, when she told Emma and Luke about her decision, Emma's reaction was immediate and devastating. "But you promised," she sobbed. "You promised you'd be my mom." "I'll still be your stepmom, sweetheart. That doesn't change just because I live somewhere else." "Yes, it does." Emma's 7-year-old logic was brutal in its accuracy. "Moms don't leave. Real moms stay." Luke said nothing, just held his crying daughter while his face remained carefully blank. But Clara caught the flash of pain in his eyes before he looked away. "When?" he asked finally. "I need to be there by January 2nd for orientation. I'll finish the semester here, help Emma transition to her new teacher." "That's 6 weeks." Yes, Emma's sobs had quieted to hiccups, but she refused to look at Clara. "I don't want a new teacher. I want you." "Emma, this is a wonderful opportunity for Clara," Luke said gently, though his voice sounded strained. "We should be happy for her." But Emma was 7 years old and newly abandoned by another mother figure. She couldn't be expected to be happy about anything. Over the next week, the house felt like a place in mourning. Emma was polite but distant with Clara, addressing her as Ms. Bennett instead of the mom she'd started using at home. Luke threw himself into work and job applications, staying late at the construction site and coming home exhausted and uncommunicative. Clara began the painful process of separating her life from theirs. She researched short-term housing in London, arranged for her belongings to be shipped, started the paperwork for her work visa. Each practical step felt like another small betrayal of the family they'd built together. The custody hearing was still scheduled for the following week, and Luke's lawyer had advised them to maintain the appearance of marital stability until after the judge made his decision. So they continued their evening routines, dinner together, homework help, bedtime stories, but the warmth had gone out of their interactions. Clara lay awake at night, questioning her decision, but unable to see a way back from it. She had committed to the London position, signed contracts, made promises to her new employers. And perhaps Luke was right. Perhaps this marriage had always been temporary, a practical solution that had served its purpose. But if that was true, why did leaving feel like tearing her heart out? The permission slip that changed everything was for Emma's class field trip to the Natural History Museum. Clara found it crumpled in the bottom of Emma's backpack on a Tuesday evening. 2 weeks after her London decision, and 1 week before the custody hearing that would determine Emma's future. Emma, "Sweetheart, this needed to be signed and returned yesterday," Clara said gently, smoothing out the wrinkled paper. Emma looked up from her colouring with studied indifference. "I forgot," but Clara could see the truth in the child's averted eyes. Emma hadn't forgotten. She had deliberately not brought it home because it required both parents' signatures, and she was still too hurt and angry to ask Clara to sign anything as her mother. Clara sat down beside Emma at the kitchen table, her heart breaking at the careful distance the child maintained between them. "Emma, I know you're angry with me about London." "I'm not angry," Emma interrupted, her 7-year-old voice attempting adult coolness. "I just don't care anymore." The words hit Clara like a physical blow. She looked at the permission slip again, noting the line that read, "Parent, guardian signature required." For a brief, shining moment after their marriage, Clara had been Emma's guardian in every sense that mattered. Now she was just a temporary stepmother counting down the days until her departure. "Would you like me to sign this so you can go on the field trip?" Clara asked quietly. Emma shrugged with elaborate indifference. "I guess." Clara signed her name, carefully on the first line, then hesitated at the second signature line. Legally, she had the right to sign as Emma's stepmother and current guardian. Emotionally, she realized with startling clarity that she wanted that right permanently. She wanted to sign permission slips and attend school plays and help with science projects for years to come. She wanted to teach Emma to drive and give advice about friendships and be there for first heartbreaks and high school graduations. She wanted to be Emma's mother in every way that mattered, not just until a job opportunity called her away. That night, after Emma was asleep and Luke was working late on job applications, Clara called her sister Rachel. "I'm making a terrible mistake," she said without preamble when Rachel answered. "About what?" Rachel asked, though her voice suggested she already knew. "London, the job, leaving Luke and Emma." "Clara, honey, you've been miserable for 2 weeks. Even I can hear it in your voice, and I'm 300 miles away." Clara sank onto her bed, still holding the signed permission slip. "I thought I was doing the right thing. Luke said I should take the opportunity, that I shouldn't sacrifice my dreams for a practical marriage." "Is it still just a practical marriage?" The question Clara had been avoiding hung in the silence between them. "No," Clara whispered. "I don't know when it stopped being practical, but it did. I love Emma like she's my own daughter, Rachel. And Luke," she stopped, afraid to voice the rest. "And Luke what? And I love Luke too. I'm in love with him, and I never meant for that to happen. But it did, and now I'm leaving, just when we might have had a chance at something real." Rachel was quiet for a moment. "Have you told him how you feel?" "How can I? He's the one who encouraged me to take the London job. He obviously sees this as a temporary arrangement that served its purpose. Or maybe he's sacrificing his own feelings because he thinks you deserve better than a marriage that started as a business deal." Clara had never considered this possibility. "You think?" "Clara, I met the man. I saw how he looked at you when he thought no one was watching. That wasn't the look of someone in a convenient arrangement." After they hung up, Clara lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying every interaction with Luke through this new lens. His careful distance lately, his insistence that she take the London job, his obvious misery that he was trying so hard to hide. What if it wasn't indifference, but heartbreak? The next morning brought new complications. Luke's lawyer called with an update about the custody hearing. The judge wants to interview Emma privately, attorney Patricia Williams explained during the conference call that included both Luke and Clara. It's standard procedure in contested custody cases. She'll ask Emma about her living situation, her preferences, her relationship with both sets of potential guardians. Clara felt her stomach drop. Will Emma understand what's happening? I'll prepare her as best I can, Luke said. But Clara could hear the strain in his voice. She knows this is important. There's another complication, the lawyer continued. Margaret Holloway's attorney has filed a motion questioning the stability of your marriage, given Clara's impending departure for London. They're arguing that the original custody arrangement was based on a two-parent household that no longer exists. Luke was quiet for a long moment. What does that mean for our case? It means the judge will likely view Clara's departure as evidence that this marriage was a temporary convenience, rather than a stable family situation. I have to ask, is there any possibility Clara might reconsider the London position? Clara found herself looking at Luke, searching his face for any sign of what he wanted her to say. But his expression remained carefully neutral. The contracts are signed, Clara said finally. I'm expected in London in 3 weeks. After the call ended, Luke and Clara sat in their kitchen in heavy silence. Emma had already left for school, chattering nervously about the upcoming Thanksgiving play, blissfully unaware that her future hung in the balance. I should probably start looking for apartments, Luke said quietly, in case the judge rules against us. I want to have a plan for Emma's transition. Clara felt as if something was breaking inside her chest. Luke, it's okay, Clara. You made the right choice. Emma and I will figure things out. But it wasn't okay, and they both knew it. Emma had already lost one mother to circumstances beyond anyone's control. Now she was about to lose another mother to choices that felt increasingly wrong with each passing day. That afternoon, Clara found herself standing in her empty classroom after school, looking at the bulletin board where Emma's work was prominently displayed. The child's latest essay was titled My Family, and it described with heartbreaking sincerity the happiness of having both a father and a mother who loved her. Miss Bennet? Emma's voice came from the doorway, surprising Clara. Daddy said I could walk back to get my library book. Clara watched Emma retrieve the book from her desk, noting how the child avoided meeting her eyes. Emma, can we talk for a minute? Emma shrugged, which Clara had learned was her new default response to most requests. I know you're hurt about London, Clara began, and I know you feel like I'm breaking a promise to you. You are breaking a promise, Emma said with devastating honesty. You said you'd be my mum, and mums don't leave. Clara knelt down so she was at Emma's eye level. You're right, mums don't leave. And Emma, I want you to know that leaving you is the hardest thing I've ever had to do. Then don't do it, Emma said, tears finally spilling over. Please don't leave us. I'll be good, I promise. I'll clean my room and do my homework without being asked, and I'll never complain about vegetables again. Clara pulled Emma into her arms, both of them crying now. Oh, sweetheart, this isn't about you being good. You're perfect just the way you are. This is about grown-up complications that have nothing to do with how much I love you. Do you really love me? Emma asked, her voice muffled against Clara's shoulder. More than anything in the world, Clara whispered. You are the daughter of my heart, Emma Maddox, and that will never change, no matter where I live. Emma pulled back to look at Clara directly. Do you love Daddy too? The question hung in the air between them. Clara thought about lying, about protecting Emma from the complicated truth of adult emotions. But she had promised herself she would always be honest with this child who had already endured too many adult deceptions. Yes, Clara said quietly. I love your daddy very much. Then why are you leaving us? It was the question Clara had been asking herself for 2 weeks, and she finally understood that she didn't have a good answer. That evening, Luke came home from work to find Clara cooking. His favorite meal, pot roast with all the fixings, the kind of comfort food that said home in ways that words couldn't capture. Emma was setting the table with unusual care, including the good napkins Clara saved for special occasions. "What's all this?" Luke asked, though his tone was careful rather than pleased. "I thought we should have a nice dinner," Clara replied, not quite meeting his eyes. "With everything that's been happening lately, we haven't had many of those." Dinner was both wonderful and heartbreaking. Emma chattered about her day with something approaching her old enthusiasm, and Luke relaxed enough to share a funny story from the construction site. For an hour, they felt like a real family again, the kind of family Clara had dreamed of her entire life. But as they cleared the dishes together, reality crept back in. Clara would be leaving in 3 weeks. The custody hearing was in 6 days. Emma would lose another mother, and Luke would lose the partner he'd never expected to need so desperately. After Emma was in bed, Clara found Luke sitting on the front porch, despite the November chill, staring out at the quiet street where they'd built their brief, complicated life together. "Mind if I join you?" Clara asked. Luke gestured to the chair beside him. They sat in companionable silence for a moment, listening to the sounds of their neighborhood settling in for the night. "I've been thinking," Clara said finally, "about the custody hearing, about Emma, about everything." Luke tensed beside her. And I think we need to talk, really talk, not just the careful politeness we've been doing for the past 2 weeks. Luke turned to look at her directly for the first time in days. "What do you want to talk about?" Clara took a deep breath, knowing that what she said next would change everything between them. "One way or another, I want to talk about why you really married me and why I really said yes, and whether either of us has been telling the truth about what this marriage means to us." Luke went very still. "Clara, because I don't think this was ever just about Emma's custody or my loneliness or any of the practical reasons we told ourselves," Clara continued, her voice gaining strength. "I think we were both looking for something we were too scared to ask for directly." What were we looking for? Clara met his eyes directly, her heart hammering, but her voice steady. Love, real messy, complicated, inconvenient love. The kind that makes you want to build a life with someone, not just share a house. The words hung in the crisp night air between them, dangerous and true, and impossible to take back. Luke stared at her as if she'd just spoken in a foreign language. "Clara, don't do this," he said quietly. "Don't make this harder than it already is. What if it doesn't have to be hard?" Clara asked. "What if we stopped pretending this was just a business arrangement and admitted that somewhere along the way it became real?" Luke stood abruptly, pacing to the porch railing. "You have a job waiting for you in London, a career, a future, everything you worked for." "I have a family here," Clara replied. "A husband who makes me coffee exactly the way I like it, and a daughter who signs her artwork, Love, Emma Maddox Bennett, even though that's not legally her name. When did a job become more important than that?" Luke gripped the porch railing, his knuckles white. "When the job was everything you dreamed of, and the marriage was something you settled for to solve someone else's problems. Is that what you think this is?" "Me settling?" Luke turned back to face her, and Clara saw years of pain and self-doubt in his expression. "Isn't it? Clara, you could have anyone. You're beautiful, educated, accomplished. You could have a real marriage with someone who courted you properly, gave you romance and passion and all the things you deserved." Clara stood as well, moving closer to him. "Luke Maddox, you were the most stubborn, self-sacrificing man I've ever met. What makes you think I want to be courted by someone else when I'm in love with you?" The admission hung between them like a bridge. Neither of them was sure they dared to cross. The marriage certificate lay on Clara's dresser where she'd placed it the night before, its official seal catching the early morning light streaming through her bedroom window. She'd pulled it from the filing cabinet after her conversation with Luke on the porch, when they'd both retreated to separate corners of the house to think about the words that had been spoken. Luke hadn't responded to her declaration of love. He'd simply stared at her for a long moment, his face cycling through emotions too complex to name, before quietly saying goodnight and disappearing into his room. Clara had heard him moving around until well past midnight, and now at 6 a.m. she could hear him in the kitchen making coffee, with the careful quiet of someone trying not to wake the rest of the house. The certificate felt heavier than it should in her hands. When they'd signed it 6 weeks ago, it had been a practical document, a means to an end. Now it represented something much more complicated, a promise made in desperation that had somehow transformed into the foundation of a real family. Clara dressed quickly and found Luke sitting at the kitchen table with his coffee and laptop, already researching apartment listings. For him and Emma, the sight of him planning their separation while she'd been upstairs, contemplating how to make their marriage real, struck her like a physical blow. "Luke," she said softly. He looked up, and Clara was startled by the exhaustion in his face. He looked like a man who hadn't slept in weeks. "We need to talk about last night," Clara continued, settling into the chair across from him. "Clara, please don't. I love you," she said simply, cutting off his protest. "I'm in love with you, Luke. Completely, hopelessly, inconveniently in love with you. And I need to know if there's any chance you feel the same way." Luke closed his laptop and ran his hands through his hair. The gesture she'd learned meant he was struggling with something difficult. "It doesn't matter how I feel," he said finally. "You're leaving in 3 weeks. You've signed contracts, made commitments. Contracts can be broken. Commitments can be reconsidered." Clara reached across the table and covered his hand with hers. "Luke, I've spent my entire adult life making safe, practical decisions. I married David because he was stable and appropriate. I became a teacher because it was respectable and secure. I've lived in the same house, worked the same job, followed the same routines for years because they were safe." Luke's hand tensed under hers, but he didn't pull away. "And then you walked into my classroom with the most outrageous proposal I'd ever heard. And for the first time in my life, I took a real risk. I said yes to something completely impractical and potentially disastrous, and it turned out to be the best decision I ever made." "Clara, let me finish." Her voice grew stronger with conviction. "Living with you and Emma these past weeks has shown me what I really want from life. I don't want career advancement or international recognition or any of the things I thought were important. I want Saturday morning pancakes and help with homework and goodnight kisses from a little girl who calls me Mom. I want to fall asleep next to the man I love and wake up knowing we're building something real together." Luke stared at her, hope and disbelief warring in his expression. "You really mean that?" "I've never meant anything more in my life." Clara stood and moved around the table to kneel beside his chair. "Luke, I know this started as a practical arrangement, but it doesn't have to stay that way. We could have something real, something lasting. If you wanted to." Luke cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs tracing the line of her cheekbones. "Clara, I've been in love with you since the second week we lived together. When you helped Emma with that nightmare, when you made my coffee exactly the way I like it without asking, when you reorganized the medicine cabinet and somehow made our whole lives run more smoothly, I knew I was in trouble." Clara's heart soared. "Then why have you been pushing me away?" "Because I was terrified that you'd realize what you were giving up and resent me for it. The London job is everything you worked for, everything you deserved." Clara silenced him with a kiss, soft and tentative at first, then deeper as Luke pulled her closer. It was their first real kiss, the first one motivated by love rather than legal necessity, and it felt like coming home. "The London job is someone else's dream," Clara whispered against his lips. "This, you, Emma, our family, this is my dream." They were interrupted by the sound of small feet on the stairs and Emma's voice calling, "Daddy! Clara, are you awake?" Luke and Clara broke apart, but not before Emma appeared in the kitchen doorway and stopped short at the sight of them, so close together. "Are you kissing?" Emma asked with 7-year-old directness. "Yes," Clara said, deciding honesty was the best policy. "We were kissing." Emma's face lit up with cautious hope. "Does that mean you're not going to London?" Clara looked at Luke, seeing her own certainty reflected in his eyes. "No, sweetheart. I'm not going to London. I'm staying right here with you and Daddy." Emma's shriek of joy could probably be heard 3 houses away. She launched herself at both adults, nearly knocking them over in her enthusiasm. Really? Really, really? You're staying forever? Forever, Clara confirmed, catching Luke's eye over Emma's head. If your daddy will have me, I'll have you, Luke said quietly, his voice rough with emotion. For as long as you'll stay. The morning dissolved into chaos as Emma insisted on calling her friend Kayla to share the news, while Clara called the London school to withdraw her acceptance, and Luke called his lawyer to update her on the change in their circumstances. You're sure about this? Attorney Williams asked during their brief conversation. This could significantly strengthen your case at the custody hearing tomorrow. I'm sure, Luke replied, watching Clara help Emma make celebratory pancakes shaped like hearts. We're sure. But even as they celebrated their decision and reveled in the joy of choosing each other, Clara couldn't shake the feeling that their troubles weren't over. Margaret Holloway wouldn't give up easily, and tomorrow's custody hearing would determine whether their newly committed family would survive intact. That afternoon, as if summoned by Clara's worried thoughts, Margaret called. I heard you've decided not to take the London position, she said without preamble when Luke answered the phone. I have to say I'm surprised. Why is that, Margaret? Because it suggests this marriage is more than the convenient arrangement I assumed it was. Margaret's voice carried a note of grudging respect. Perhaps I misjudged the situation. Luke met Clara's eyes across the room, hope flickering in his chest. Yes, you did. Well, regardless, tomorrow's hearing will determine what's truly best for Emma. I hope you're prepared to prove that this unconventional family of yours can provide her with everything she needs. After Margaret hung up, Luke and Clara spent the evening preparing for the custody hearing with renewed determination. They gathered documents, reviewed their testimony, and tried to present their strongest case for why Emma should remain with them. But as Clara lay in bed that night, alone still, since they'd agreed to take their physical relationship slowly, she stared at the marriage certificate on her dresser and whispered a prayer to whatever forces governed the universe. Tomorrow would determine whether the family they'd chosen would be allowed to stay together. Luke's tool belt hung on its usual hook by the back door, the leather worn smooth from years of honest work. The tools arranged with the precision of a man who understood that preparation and order were the foundation of everything worthwhile. Clara found herself staring at it while Luke showered and Emma finished her breakfast, thinking about the kind of man who took such care with the implements of his trade, who understood that building something lasting required the right tools and infinite patience. The custody hearing was scheduled for 9 a.m., and they were all dressed in their best clothes, Luke in his wedding suit, Clara in a navy dress that projected both professionalism and maternal warmth, Emma in a blue dress with white tights that made her look impossibly young and vulnerable. Are you nervous, Daddy? Emma asked as Luke helped her with her coat. A little, Luke admitted, kneeling to zip her jacket. But you know what? Sometimes being nervous just means something is really important to you. And you, Emma Rose Maddox, are the most important thing in the world to me. Emma threw her arms around his neck. You're the most important thing to me too. You and Clara. Clara's heart clenched as she watched them together, this father and daughter who had weathered so much loss and uncertainty. Whatever happened in that courtroom, she would never regret choosing them. Choosing this imperfect, complicated, beautiful family they had built together. The courthouse was an imposing building of grey stone and tall windows, its architecture designed to inspire both respect and intimidation. They met their lawyer in the hallway, Attorney Williams, looking confident but serious in her dark suit. Remember, she coached them quietly, be honest, be respectful, and trust that the truth is our strongest argument. The judge wants to see that Emma is loved and cared for, that she has stability and support. Margaret and Richard Holloway were already seated when they entered the courtroom, Margaret resplendent in an expensive suit that spoke of country club lunches and charity board positions. She nodded coolly to Luke and gave Clara an assessing look that felt like a challenge. Judge Patricia Williams, no relation to their lawyer, was a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. She reviewed the case file while the court reporter set up her equipment. then address the room with quiet authority. This hearing will determine the custody arrangement for Emma Rose Maddox, currently 7 years old. I want to remind everyone present that this child's best interests are my only concern. I will hear testimony from both parties, review the relevant documentation, and speak privately with Emma herself. Clara felt Luke tense beside her at the mention of Emma's private interview. They had prepared Emma as gently as possible, but asking a 7-year-old to articulate her feelings about such a consequential decision seemed impossibly cruel. Margaret's lawyer spoke first, painting a picture of the Holloways as the ideal guardians, financially stable, socially connected, able to provide Emma with educational advantages and cultural opportunities that Luke could never match. He questioned Luke's employment stability, his youth and inexperience when he'd first become a single father, the rushed nature of his recent marriage. My clients offer Emma a traditional 2-parent household with established roots in the community, he concluded. They can provide her with the consistency and resources that every child deserves. When Attorney Williams stood to present their case, Clara felt her breath catch. This was it, the moment when their unconventional family would be judged and found either worthy or wanting. Your Honor, their lawyer began, love cannot be measured by bank accounts or social standing. Luke Maddox has been Emma's devoted father since birth, and his love for his daughter has never been in question. He has worked multiple jobs to provide for her, sacrificed his own comfort for her well-being, and created a stable, nurturing home environment despite difficult circumstances. She outlined Luke's employment history, his dedication to Emma's education and emotional development, the way he had consistently put Emma's needs above his own. Then she turned to Clara's role in their family. Clara Bennett brought to this family not just financial stability, but professional expertise in child development and a deep, genuine love for Emma. This is not a marriage of convenience. It is a marriage of choice, chosen by two people who recognize that families can be built in many ways, but are sustained by only one thing: unconditional love. When it was time for testimony, Luke spoke first, his voice steady despite the stakes. "Emma is everything to me," he said simply. "I know I'm not perfect. I know I can't give her everything that money can buy. But I can give her something that no amount of money can purchase: the absolute certainty that she is loved completely and unconditionally. Exactly as she is," Clara testified next, her teacher's training helping her speak clearly despite her nervousness. "I didn't marry Luke to gain a daughter," she said. "I married him to keep a daughter from losing her father. But Emma has become the child of my heart, and Luke has become the partner I never knew I was looking for. We are a family not because of legal documents or financial arrangements, but because we choose each other every day." Margaret testified with polished confidence about the advantages she could provide Emma: private schools, music lessons, travel opportunities, connections to influential families. Her testimony was compelling and well-rehearsed. But Clara noticed that she spoke about Emma's potential and Emma's future without mentioning Emma's happiness or Emma's own wishes. Finally, it was Emma's turn. Judge Williams called a brief recess and met privately with Emma in her chambers, leaving the adults to wait in tense silence in the hallway. 20 minutes felt like 20 hours. Clara paced the marble corridor while Luke sat with his head in his hands, both of them wondering what questions Emma was being asked and how a 7-year-old could possibly navigate such an impossible situation. When they were called back into the courtroom, Emma emerged from the judge's chambers looking small but composed. She took her seat between Luke and Clara, reaching for both their hands with quiet determination. Judge Williams reviewed her notes. "For a moment before addressing the courtroom, I have listened to all testimony and reviewed the relevant documentation. I've also spoken extensively with Emma about her feelings and preferences regarding her living situation." She paused, looking directly at Emma. "This young lady is remarkably articulate and mature for her age, and her insights have been invaluable to my decision." Clara held her breath. While I appreciate the material advantages that Mr. and Mrs. Holloway could provide, I must consider what is truly in Emma's best interests, not just financially, but emotionally and developmentally. Emma has thrived in her current living situation. Her grades have improved, her confidence has grown, and she has formed strong, healthy attachments to both her father and stepmother. The judge's gaze moved to Luke and Clara. More importantly, Emma has expressed clearly and consistently that she wishes to remain with her father and Clara. She feels loved, supported, and secure in their care. While the Holloway's intentions are undoubtedly good, uprooting a child from a stable, loving home to provide material advantages would not serve her best interests. Clara felt Luke's hand squeeze hers. Both of them afraid to believe what they were hearing. Therefore, Judge Williams continued, custody of Emma Rose Maddox will remain with her father, Luke Maddox and his wife, Clara Bennett Maddox. I'm confident that this family, however unconventionally formed, will continue to provide Emma with the love, stability, and support she needs to thrive. Emma's joyful cry echoed through the courtroom as she launched herself at both adults simultaneously. Clara caught her with tears streaming down her face, while Luke wrapped both his girls in his arms, his face buried in Clara's hair. They had won. Against all odds, their impossible family had been deemed worthy of staying together. As they left the courthouse, Margaret approached them with surprising grace. "Congratulations," she said quietly to Luke. "I still think Emma would have thrived with us, but I can see that she's happy with you. That's what matters most." She knelt to Emma's level. "I love you very much, sweetheart, and I'll always be your grandmother, no matter where you live." Emma hugged her with the generous heart of a child who understood that love could exist in multiple places without being diminished. Outside the courthouse, in the crisp November air, Clara finally allowed herself to believe that their family was real, permanent, unshakable. Luke spun Emma around until she giggled with delight, then set her down and pulled Clara into a kiss that felt like a promise. A celebration and a new beginning all at once. They were going home together, all three of them, to the house where Luke's tool belt hung ready for whatever building projects their future might require. 6 months after the custody hearing, the new family portrait arrived in a plain brown envelope, delivered by a photographer who had captured something magical during their spring session at the local park. Clara held the 8x10 print carefully, studying the faces that looked back at her, Luke's arm around her shoulders, Emma perched between them with a gap-toothed grin, all three of them laughing at something the photographer had said just before the shutter clicked. It was such a different picture from the formal wedding photo they'd taken at the courthouse, where they'd all looked slightly stunned by what they'd just done. This new portrait showed a family that had grown into itself, and that had weathered uncertainty and chosen each other with full hearts and open eyes. "I love this one," Emma announced, standing on her tiptoes to examine the photo. "We look like we really belong together. We do really belong together," Clara said, ruffling Emma's hair. "That's what makes it such a good picture." They hung the portrait in the living room, replacing the generic landscape print that had decorated Clara's walls during her single years. The new photo transformed the room, making it feel lived in and loved in a way that expensive furniture never could. Spring had brought changes beyond just family photographs. Luke had been promoted to crew supervisor at Henderson Construction, a recognition of his skill and reliability that came with both increased responsibility and better pay. The financial pressure that had once kept him awake at night had eased enough that he could focus on building rather than just surviving. Clara had found her own professional satisfaction deepening as well. Working with Emma as both teacher and mother had given her insights into child development that enhanced her classroom effectiveness with all her students. The school district had asked her to mentor new teachers, recognizing the calm wisdom she brought to challenging situations. But the most significant change was the subtle deepening of the relationship between Clara and Luke themselves. They had moved beyond the careful politeness of their early marriage into something warmer and more natural. Luke's room had gradually been converted back into an office as he spent more nights in Clara's bed, their physical intimacy growing slowly alongside their emotional connection. "I never thought I'd be grateful for Margaret's interference," Luke said one evening as they sat on their front porch, watching Emma play with the neighbor's dog in the yard. "But in a way, her custody challenge forced us to figure out what we really wanted." Clara leaned against his shoulder, breathing in the scent of his aftershave, mixed with the sawdust that always seemed to cling to his clothes. "I think we knew what we wanted. We just needed permission to admit it, even when you were planning to leave for London." Clara considered this, especially then. "I think part of me was running away because I was scared of how much I was starting to need you both. It felt safer to leave before I got in too deep. And now I know that being in too deep is exactly where I want to be." They had started making plans for a proper wedding ceremony, something Emma could fully participate in, something that celebrated the love they had discovered rather than the practical arrangement they had begun with. Clara's sister Rachel was beside herself with excitement about planning the event, while Luke good-naturedly submitted to discussions about flowers and venues that would have baffled him a year earlier. "Can I wear the same dress from your first wedding?" Emma asked during one particularly detailed planning session. "I want people to know I was there from the beginning." "Of course you can, sweetheart," Clara said, touched by Emma's desire to claim her place in their love story. "You're the reason Daddy and I found each other. You should definitely wear the same dress." The house hunting had begun in earnest, now that they were sure their family would remain intact. Clara's small cottage had served them well, but they needed more space, a proper bedroom for Luke, a larger kitchen for the family meals they had come to treasure, a yard big enough for the garden Emma wanted to plant, and the workshop Luke dreamed of building. "Look at this one," Clara said on a Saturday morning, pointing to a listing on her laptop. 4 bedrooms, 2.5 baths, established neighborhood with good schools. Luke peered over her shoulder, noting the price and the list of needed repairs. "It's within our budget if I do most of the renovation work myself." "Our budget," Clara repeated with satisfaction. Somewhere along the way, his money and her money had simply become their money, pooled together for the family goals they now shared. Emma bounded into the kitchen, still in her pajamas but wide awake with the energy of a child who had slept soundly in the security of a stable home. "Are we looking at houses?" she asked, climbing onto Clara's lap to examine the laptop screen. "I like this one. It has a big backyard for a swing set, and a workshop space for Daddy," Clara pointed out, noting Luke's interest in the detached garage. "And a sunroom where you could have your morning coffee and read," Luke added, having learned Clara's habits well enough to envision her in the bright space off the kitchen. They spent the morning creating a wish list of features and locations, their conversation punctuated by Emma's increasingly elaborate plans for decorating her potential new bedroom. It was the kind of domestic planning that Clara had once thought would bore her, but instead she found it deeply satisfying, this building of a future that belonged to all of them equally. On Sunday, they attended church together for the first time. Emma, dressed in her favorite dress and positioned proudly between her parents in the pew. Clara had grown up attending services with her family, but she had drifted away during her marriage to David and her subsequent years of single living. Now surrounded by Luke and Emma, she rediscovered the comfort of belonging to something larger than herself. After the service, they joined the congregation for coffee and pastries in the fellowship hall, where Emma immediately gravitated toward the other children, while Clara and Luke navigated the gentle curiosity of their neighbors. "You're the teacher who married the Maddox fellow, aren't you?" asked Mrs. Henderson, an elderly woman who had known Clara since she'd moved to town. "Such a lovely family you've made together." "Thank you," Clara replied, slipping her hand into Luke's. "We think so too." Later that afternoon, they spread a blanket in their backyard and let Emma practice the math problems she would be learning in 3rd grade next year. Clara marveled at how much the child had grown in confidence and ability since the beginning of the school year, how the stability of their family life had freed Emma to focus on learning rather than worrying. I'm going to miss having you as my teacher," Emma said, as Clara helped her work through a particularly challenging word problem. "You're ready to move on to Mrs. Patterson's class," Clara assured her. "And I'll still be right there in the same building if you need anything. Will you still help me with homework?" "Every night, if you want me to." Emma beamed and returned to her math with renewed focus, secure in the knowledge that the adults in her life would continue to be available to support her growth and development. As the sun began to set, painting their small backyard in golden light, Clara looked at her family and felt the deep satisfaction of a dream fulfilled in ways she had never imagined. She had wanted a child, and Emma had become the daughter of her heart. She had wanted a partner, and Luke had become the husband who understood her need for both security and adventure. She had wanted a purpose, and teaching had expanded to encompass the daily nurturing of her own family as well as her students. "What are you thinking about?" Luke asked quietly, noting her contemplative expression. "Just this," Clara replied, gesturing to encompass Emma's sprawled homework session, Luke's protective presence beside her, the comfortable chaos of their shared life. How sometimes the best things come in the most unexpected packages, like desperate single fathers making impossible proposals in empty classrooms. Clara laughed. Exactly like that. As they gathered up Emma's school supplies and prepared to go inside for dinner, Clara caught sight of their reflection in the kitchen window, 3 silhouettes moving in comfortable coordination, each knowing their place in the family rhythm they had created together. Every parent knows that moment when you do anything to protect your child, she thought, remembering the words that had started their story 6 months earlier. But what she had learned since then was that love, real, deep, transformative love, made them all capable of the most beautiful acts of courage she had ever imagined. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, new moments of growth and discovery. But tonight, they were simply a family going inside to share dinner, to help with homework, to read bedtime stories, and to wake up together in the house where love had taught them all how to build something lasting from the most improbable beginnings.